You may be seated. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Were there any problems in the overnight? Did anybody try to contact you about this case? Could you simply not resist the urge to talk about this case? Did you intentionally or inadvertently receive any media information about this case? Hear anything about this case? Very good. Before we begin the trial proceedings this morning, there's a matter I want to put of record in the presence of the jury. I want the jury here because it is a matter that is relevant to them. On November 3rd of 2016 at 8:20 a.m., the court administrator received the following request from Sharon Coolidge of the Cincinnati Enquirer. Mr. Dressing, thank you for the statement last evening. Excuse me. As a follow-up, can you please provide the contract for the outside attorneys and the hourly rate? Additionally, there was a request made for the transcript and the juror questionnaires with all identifying information, completed questionnaires. Normally, when county judges need legal advice, they're represented by the prosecuting attorney's office. Because the prosecuting attorney is a litigator in this case, the court requested and retained an attorney from Columbus to represent the court on legal issues surrounding media access to these proceedings. That outside counsel, Mark Landis, has previously been retained through the Ohio Supreme Court to represent judges in 2 different appellate districts. At my direction, Mr. Landis made contact with the attorney for the Enquirer, Mr. Jack Greiner, to discuss the Enquirer's request for copies of the jurors' questionnaires. Because I know that many of the jurors here are concerned about their identities being made public during this trial, I wanted to explore all possible options to protect the jurors' identities. The Enquirer has claimed that it has the absolute right to have all of the jurors' questionnaires, including the identities of the jurors. The court disagrees. To that end, this morning I entered an order that will allow for the release of the questionnaires only after all personally identifying information has been protected. I personally reviewed the questionnaires to be sure that those protections have been made. Many of you have expressed serious concern and fear in your questionnaires, and more recently have repeatedly shared with my bailiff your fear and concerns regarding your identity being made public. I feel your concerns and I respect your wishes. A copy of my court order is available from the court administrator and the clerk of courts, as are the questionnaires with these protections in place. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get back to the real issue. We are here. Mr. Pete Meyer, call your next witness.
Call Scott Hope.
Please come around this side, Mr. Hope. Before you take the stand, will you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please take a seat.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Would you introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury and spell your first and last name so that we have it correctly in the record?
Good morning. My name is Scott Hogue, and I'm here on behalf of Public Safety Insight, which is a company that my partner and I operate. We provide consulting and training services across the country.
And again, give me the spelling of your first and last name.
Oh, I apologize. The first name is Scott, S-C-O-T, and the last name is H-A-U-G, pronounced Hogue.
And would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what Public Safety Insight is and what position you hold there?
My partner and I have been providing training and consulting services for about 10 years, and that's a company that we started that we use to provide those services.
And what kind of training do you administer?
Most of the training that we provide is officer survival training. We do some technology training as well and a variety of law enforcement related technologies.
Can you tell us a little bit about your employment history in the field of law enforcement, please?
Yeah, in addition to my work with Public Safety Insight, my full-time job is that of a police officer. I've been a police officer with the City of Post Falls, Idaho Police Department for 30 years. I started as a volunteer at age 19 and have worked my way up through the ranks in that position. My first sworn position was that of a police officer. I was then promoted to sergeant, administrative sergeant, lieutenant, captain, and was appointed as the chief of police in 2009, and I currently hold that position today.
And as a point of reference, Post Falls is a city in Idaho near, I guess, the next biggest city would be Spokane.
Yeah, we're located up in the Pacific Northwest, right on the border, the Idaho border with Spokane, Washington, about 5 hours to the east of Seattle, to give you a little bit of reference.
And can you give the jurors some idea of the courses that you've taught to law enforcement officers over the years?
I have spent about the last 20 years being a law enforcement trainer. My primary focus early on was arrest techniques and use of force. I've attended hundreds of hours of training as it relates to arrest techniques and the lawful means of taking somebody into custody, which includes the use of force. I have been training law enforcement officers for many years. I was the lead instructor for 10 years at North Idaho College, where I would assist new students that were coming in to the program and provide training to them in arrest techniques. In addition, officer survival instructor. I've been doing that for a number of years. For about the last 5 years, I've been traveling across the country providing and be safer in the jobs that they do. I have the opportunity to speak to thousands of police officers all over the country. The specialty that I have is that of law enforcement technology. I've been involved in a variety of different the implementation of law enforcement technology type programs, from license plate recognition technology to in-car video system technology to BWC or body-worn camera technology. I have been involved in a body-worn camera program from the beginning to the end, from the research to the implementation to the policy development to the training, and do travel across the country and provide instruction to other officers and agencies on how to implement those programs.
All right. And have you testified in courts of law around the country on these topics in the past?
Yes, I have. I have provided consulting in these type of cases in about a dozen different times and have testified in court, yes.
Judge, at this time I would tender Mr. Hogue as an expert in these fields unless there's some dispute as to his qualifications.
Any objection? He'll be declared an expert, thank you, in those fields.
Sir, sometime in 2015, after the month of July, were you contacted by the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office?
Yes, I was contacted by the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office in, I believe it was October of 2015, to provide some assistance in this case.
And when you say this case, that's the Ray Tenzing case involving the shooting of an unarmed motorist named Samuel Dubose?
That's correct, yes.
And you met with the prosecutor's office and ultimately you were retained?
That's correct, yes.
And obviously you're going to bill for and be paid for your services, is that correct?
That's correct. I haven't got to a financial position where I can donate my time yet.
This isn't a hobby for you, this is what you do for a living?
That's correct.
Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what documents and information you were given to review to form opinions in this case?
I was provided a series of different documents. body-worn camera video from several different officers, including Officer Tenzing, Officer Kidd, Officer Lyndon Smits, and others. I had the opportunity to review their statements, both listen to the audio portions of that as well as look at the written transcriptions. Looked at pictures of the scene, pictures of the vehicle, about 76 different pieces of evidence that I looked at in this matter. In addition, looked at the University of Cincinnati's use of force policy, the Ohio Peace Officers training standards for a variety of different training topics. And then I had the opportunity to fly out to Cincinnati on December 17th and 18th, I believe it was, to actually visit the scene and then also look at Mr. Dubose' vehicle.
All right. So on December the 17th and 18th, you were here in town. You met with the prosecutor's office.
Yes, I flew out here and met with the prosecutor's office.
Did you actually get a chance to go up to the scene on at Rice Street and walk that scene?
I did, yes.
And were you accompanied there by some members of the Cincinnati Police Department's criminalistics unit who pointed out where various things were recovered?
Yes, I was.
You also indicated you got to have an opportunity to see Samuel Dubose's crashed vehicle.
Yes, I was taken to the Cincinnati Police Department impound yard and had the opportunity to view Mr. Dubose's vehicle that was involved in this situation.
Now, do you know an individual by the name of Grant Fredericks?
I do, yes.
How do you know Grant Fredericks?
I met Grant a number of years ago. He and I worked with the IACP, which is the International Association of Chiefs of Police Association. They had received a grant from the Department of Justice to develop some video.
The objection sustained. Just wait for another question.
The next question is, how do you know Mr. Fredericks?
I do know Mr. Fredericks, and the way I know him is through committees that he and I sat on through the International Chiefs of Police on behalf of the Department of Justice.
In this case, once you were retained and had visited the scene, had reviewed all the documents and information you received from the prosecutor's office and Cincinnati Police Department, did you have an occasion ever to meet with Grant Fredericks on this case?
I did, yes.
Now, as an expert in the implementation of body-worn camera technology, you probably look at more body camera video than the average person. Would that be fair?
That would be correct, yes.
But you certainly don't hold yourself out like Grant Fredericks as a forensic video analyst. Is that fair?
No, I do not.
What was your purpose in seeing Grant Fredericks and speaking with him?
When I was asked to review this case, there were several body-worn camera videos, and I wanted to get an expert's opinion on that. I had reviewed them myself, but I wanted to get an expert's opinion, and so when I have these matters, Grant and I do consult together, and so I took that video to him for review.
And did your meetings with Grant Fredericks confirm some of the things you had already observed in these videos?
Yes, it did.
Once you hit, well, let me ask this question. Was Grant Fredericks later also retained by the prosecutor's office?
That's my understanding, yes.
Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury some of the findings you made after viewing all these documents with regard to the incident that occurred on July 19th, 2015?
Do you want me to go through step by step?
Well, let's start with this. What about the initial stop of Samuel Dubose by Officer Tenzing?
Well, in reviewing the video and the reports, it's my opinion that he had probable cause to stop the vehicle. He was on patrol in a marked patrol vehicle, wearing a uniform, observed a vehicle without a front license plate, which is in violation of Ohio law. He ran the rear tag of the vehicle, and the registered owner of that vehicle showed to be suspended, and so he decided to stop the vehicle. I think that was reasonable under the circumstances.
And justified by law?
Yes, I believe so.
And the fact that he's stopping this vehicle off campus, did that detract from or take away from that reasonableness?
No, I don't believe so. In my research, there is a MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, between the University of Cincinnati and the Cincinnati Police Department that allows their officers to make traffic stops off of campus, so I think that was reasonable.
In his initial approach to Mr. DuBose's vehicle, did Officer Tenzing act reasonably, appropriately, and professionally when he first approached and began to speak with Samuel DuBose?
Yes, he exited his patrol car, walked up to him and greeted him, explained who he was and why he had stopped him. I thought he was professional.
One thing I note in the video, did you note in there that Samuel DuBose seemed to want to give identifying information, name, here's my name, that kind of stuff, look me up?
Yeah, I did notice in listening to the video that Mr. DuBose did offer to Officer Tenzing to, why don't you just run my name or something to that effect, and offered that to him when he didn't have his license.
Did Ray Tenzing ever ask him for a name or a date of birth or any information that he could use to figure out who it was he was dealing with at the time?
No, he did not.
Would that have been useful and helpful to the officer?
Yes, I think when you're contacting someone who doesn't have a driver's license, that would be one of the first questions that you would ask, is, especially when they're offering that information, to try to identify them, to ask for their name and date of birth so that you can know who you're talking with and be able to go back and run them through the computer system,
And
NCIC.
you might find out more information about who the person is?
That's correct.
And it's your understanding from the video that this was not someone that Raymond Tenzing knew or was acquainted with?
I don't know that.
All right, was there anything in the video that would lead you to believe that?
No.
Okay. Now, at some point, does Officer Tenzing ask Samuel DuBose to step out of the car?
Yes, he does.
And
Basis.
Challenge him to say where that is on that video.
I'll overrule the objection to the event that, or to the extent that the video controls. If there is a mischaracterization, we can revisit that.
was Officer Tenzing justified in asking that person, Samuel DuBose, to step out of the vehicle?
Yes, he was.
He had not produced a license at that time, is that correct?
That's correct.
Did Mr. DuBose immediately comply with that order?
No, he did not.
At that point, will you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you saw on that video Samuel DuBose do?
In reviewing the video, after Officer Tenzing asked him to remove his seatbelt, Mr. DuBose reached over and grabbed onto the door as Officer Tenzing was opening it and pulled the door shut.
Is that something that an officer that's trained as a patrol officer should reasonably anticipate and be prepared for?
Yeah, I think when you look at the facts of this incident, I think many aspects of it were predictable. It is not uncommon for the driver of a vehicle to be resistant.
And in the video, what was your observation as to what Officer Tenzing did in response to Samuel DuBose starting that vehicle?
Well, when I was reviewing the video, it appeared that he lunged inside of the vehicle with his left hand. In reading the statements, he made the statement that he was trying to, I think he used the words, knock the keys out to get the driver to stop.
Did you find that conduct on the part of Raymond Tenzing to be reasonable and appropriate for an officer?
No, I did not. I think that is tactically unsound to lunge into a vehicle that you believe is going to be leaving the scene.
Can you explain why that is?
Well, as I mentioned about predictability, we know as police officers that if you reach inside of a vehicle, that there is a likelihood that you can become trapped, you can become injured. We've seen police officers across the country be injured or killed in those kind of circumstances. And so typical law enforcement training, and that of Ohio, would tell officers not to reach inside of a vehicle under these types of circumstances.
What factors did you see in this case that made this action by Officer Tenzing unreasonable?
Well, I think number one, you have to consider the reason for the stop. You're dealing with a minor traffic violation, and you have someone who is trying to flee the scene, and I think that Officer Tenzing had other options that he could have used to try to handle this situation.
So as far as Officer Tenzing knew at this point, all he had was a no front plate citation, and maybe a no driver's license citation.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think he also knew that he had someone that was not complying, and I think that's a consideration that needs to be considered in this matter, and that a reasonable officer would consider.
Based on your view of the video, and not just his, but Kidd's and Lindenschmidt's, did Officer Tenzing have backup on the scene?
Yes, he did.
What happens if he simply steps aside and allows this vehicle to pull away?
Well, I think that, as I mentioned, there are several things that he could have done, and that would be one of them, that you had a backup car that showed up with 2 police officers in it. Had he just taken a step back and asked them to pursue the vehicle if it fled, that would have been a reasonable way to handle this situation.
Did his action in lunging into the vehicle increase the danger for both himself and the driver of that vehicle?
Absolutely.
Are you familiar with a phrase, and I've heard it called various names. One of the terms I've heard it called is officer-created or officer-induced jeopardy?
Yeah, I use the terminology state-created danger, but yes, I'm familiar with that term.
And what does that mean?
Well, when an officer uses unsound tactics in a predictable event, there's a possibility to set off a set of circumstances that can end in tragedy. And what I mean by that is that we as police officers know that on traffic stops, occasionally people will flee from us. And we also know that if you lunge or reach inside of a vehicle, that you can become trapped. Officers have been injured, officers have been killed. And so it's predictable to know what the outcome would be under that set of circumstances. And so what state-created danger would be is when the officer creates a situation that then they articulate as the reason that they used an elevated level of force.
In addition to being unreasonable and inappropriate, was this action inconsistent with training that you saw in the materials you received as to Ray Tenzing's training?
Yes, it was.
Now, in the statement of Ray Tenzing that you received, what danger did he indicate he feared?
Well, he mentioned in his statement that he feared for his life.
And from what? What was the danger that was putting him in peril?
Oh, I apologize. He mentioned that he was in fear of being dragged by the car.
Did he allege that he was hung up in the steering wheel?
Yes, he did.
Now, you reviewed the body cam video, is that correct, in its entirety?
I have several times, yes, I've reviewed the videos.
Did you find anything in that body cam video that you reviewed that ever indicated he was ever hung up or was caught in the steering wheel?
No, I have reviewed it dozens and dozens of times. I've reviewed it with the video expert, Grant Fredericks, and can find no location at any time in the video where he is hung up in the vehicle and being dragged.
And that was my next question, did you ever find anything in that video to indicate that he was being dragged by the vehicle?
No.
Now, do you recall in the statement of Officer Tenzing, at what point did he indicate that he pulled his service weapon?
When did Officer Tenzing indicate that?
That he pulled his weapon, correct?
He mentioned that he pulled his weapon because he was in fear for his life. I don't remember if he mentioned exactly what was the trigger for that.
Well, when was it? Was it while he was being dragged?
Yes.
Okay, so he said he was being dragged, and not until that point did he pull his service weapon, is that correct?
I believe that's true, yes.
In the video that you received from Officer Tenzing's body camera, did Officer Tenzing, had the car moved at all at the point at which Officer Tenzing reached for and produced his handgun?
I do not believe it did, no.
Now, what factors go into determining the reasonableness of an officer's use of deadly force?
I think there's several different factors that you consider when you're looking at a case like this. You would look at all of the evidence that you're provided. You would look at the policy and procedure that guides the police officer as they perform their duties. You would look at their training. What does the training say about this particular situation? And then last but most importantly, you would look at case law. What do the courts, what have they ruled in regards to how to handle these type of situations? So you would take all of that in what they call the totality of the circumstances and look to see whether the officer's actions were reasonable under the circumstances.
And would the severity of the offense be one of the factors to be taken into account?
Yeah, and one of the benchmark cases as it relates to matters like this is a case called Graham versus Connor. It was decided in 1989 by the United States Supreme Court, and it governs all of us in law enforcement regardless of what state that you're policing in. And in that case, it's an incident that happened in 1984 in Charlotte, North Carolina, where Mr. Graham was injured by police officers during an encounter. And what the courts ruled in that case is that officers must be judged by the reasonableness standard of what would a reasonable officer in similar circumstances do. And they didn't give us a bright line, but they gave us several different steps to consider. And one of those is the seriousness of the offense.
And again, here we're dealing with a no driver's license.
That's
or
correct.
no driver's plate and possibly a no driver's license.
Yes, that's correct.
Does it also, as a factor, contain that the suspect poses an immediate threat of serious physical harm or death to the officer or others?
Yes, that's correct. That would
Did you find that at the time the shot was fired, Samuel DuBose posed a threat of death or serious physical harm to Ray Tenzing?
I do not believe that he did, no.
Because he was not tangled in the car and being being dragged?
That's correct.
All right. In his interview, did Ray Tenzing complain that he was concerned of any other danger? Did he indicate that he saw a weapon, that he thought Samuel DuBose possessed a weapon, or that he was going to hurt him any way other than this dragging that he said occurred?
No, I did not see any indication of that. No mention of a weapon at all.
So the sole and only danger he said was I was being dragged and was afraid I would be pulled under the car.
That's correct.
Are officers trained and taught to position themselves in any particular location during a traffic stop to protect themselves from the driver and from the actions of the driver operating a vehicle?
Yes, they are.
And what is that, sir?
Well, in training, officers are provided a series of different tactical options involving traffic stops. It can mean where they approach, whether it's a driver's side approach or a passenger side approach, how they conduct themselves. Officers are always encouraged to look at a traffic stop as never a routine traffic stop, but an unknown risk traffic stop. They don't know what they're facing when they walk up to the car, so they're provided a series of different things to consider when they make a traffic stop.
And are they instructed to stand either between the A and B pillar or at the B pillar?
That's correct, yes.
And why is that, sir?
So that it gives them the time to react if something were to occur.
So that they're not out in the possible path of the car?
That's true as well, yes.
Did the Supreme Court cases that you've referred to, did they do away with the fleeing felon rule?
Well, the Tennessee versus Garner case, which is a case from 1985, yes, did do that.
At one point in time in this country, an officer could shoot someone just because he was fleeing from the officer, whether he posed a danger or not. Is that correct?
That's correct, and that comes from a case out of Memphis, Tennessee in 1974, where police officers responded to a burglary in progress. When the officers arrived, they saw Mr. Garner running away from the scene. He was a 15-year-old boy. The officer, using his flashlight, saw that he was unarmed and did not feel threatened by him, but shouted for him to stop. And as he was preparing to jump a 6-foot chain link fence, he shot him in the back of the head. And under Tennessee law at the time, an officer could shoot a fleeing felon. So the Garner family pursued that in court, and what the Supreme Court said in its ruling in 1985 is that the government's interest in apprehending a fleeing felon does not override somebody's life, and that you cannot shoot a fleeing subject unless the officer has probable cause to believe that his or someone else's life is in immediate danger of injury or death. And so that has been the law of the land since 1985. And again, that's a Supreme Court decision that all law enforcement officers, no matter where you work, are guided by.
And all law enforcement officers are subject to that law, is that correct?
That's correct.
And they can no longer shoot someone just because he's trying to flee or get away, or just because he's not doing as ordered by the officer.
That's correct.
Is the new standard that an officer can only use deadly force if he has probable cause to believe it's necessary to protect himself or others from immediate threat of death or serious bodily harm?
That's correct.
And is it also required now as the law of the land that the use of force must be objectively reasonable?
That's correct, yes.
Sir, in your complete examination of this case, do you have an opinion as to the reasonableness and lawfulness of Officer Tenzing's use of deadly force in this case?
Yeah, after considering the totality of the circumstances and all of the evidence that I discussed, including the case law, it's my opinion that Officer Tenzing acted unreasonably in his use of force in this situation.
His shooting of Samuel DuBose, in your opinion as an expert, was it justified?
No, it was not, in my opinion.
Take your time.
Judge, I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Okay. Is it Chief Hogg?
It's Hogue is my last name.
Hogue,
Yeah, Mr.
okay.
Hogue.
Chief, you indicated you're from Post Falls, Idaho, correct?
From Idaho, yes.
How big is, well, you're the police chief at Post Falls, Idaho.
That's correct, yes.
How big is Post Falls, Idaho?
We're a community of between 30 and 35,000. There's about 400,000 in our metropolitan area.
And so your city is smaller than the population of the student population of the campus of the University of Cincinnati. Would that be a fair statement on my part?
I don't know what the population of UC is.
Okay. How many officers are employed at your department?
There's about a total of 100 employees and volunteers. About, in round numbers, 45 to 50 of those are sworn officers.
And I was impressed by your resume and by the fact that you travel around the country and teach and instruct. How often do you do that?
I would say on a monthly basis, I travel to provide instruction across the country.
On a monthly basis?
I believe so, yeah.
Do you have time to be chief there at Post Falls?
Yes, I do.
And they put up with that.
I have a good staff that continues to run the operation, so yes.
Would you classify yourself as a professional witness?
I believe so, yes.
You indicated that you've been retained because you don't have sufficient funds to do this on a volunteer basis, correct?
That's correct.
How much are you being paid for your testimony today?
I charge an hourly rate to provide this. Are you asking how much I've been paid to date or how much I'm charging? I don't understand the question.
Okay, well, the question is that are you getting on an airplane and leaving here today?
Yes, I am.
And then you're finished with this case, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
What do you figure your total bill is going to be by the time you're finished?
I don't know for sure. I would say several $1,000s that I've billed so far. A lot of that is for travel and lodging and per diem when I came out here. I don't know the exact amount, but it's been several $1,000s that I've billed so far.
And did you travel here with Grant Fredericks?
No, I did not.
Have you seen him since you've been here?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Now, you indicated in your testimony that you looked at a whole lot of different stuff, right?
Yes, sir.
To arrive at your opinions in this case?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did you happen to look at the autopsy report of Samuel DuBose?
I was provided autopsy pictures. I don't know if I actually looked at the autopsy report.
Okay. Were you aware that Samuel DuBose had a state of Ohio identification card in his pocket at the time of this incident?
No, I was not aware of that.
In your experience as a police officer, have you ever worked the streets?
Yes, I've worked the streets.
Have you ever reached into a car during your career?
No, I have not.
Okay. One of the things you teach is handcuffing techniques, correct?
That's correct.
Are you familiar with the handcuffing technique of handcuffing a person before you remove them from a vehicle?
I'm aware of that technique, that it is taught. I think Caliber Press, in their instructions on traffic stops, has instructed that. I have not been through that myself, but I'm aware of that.
You would agree that that is a valid technique for removing someone from a car, handcuffing them before you get them out?
Yeah, I believe that would be a valid technique.
Would you agree with me that there are no absolutes in law enforcement, that every situation is unique and different?
That is correct. In law enforcement, you never know from one incident to the next of what you're going to be dealing with. That's correct.
Yeah, I noticed in the CV that I was provided about you that you are a disciple of Dr. Bill Lewinsky. Do you know Dr. Lewinsky?
I have attended training that he has put on. I'm not sure what the term disciple means.
Well, are you affiliated with him in any way?
No, I am not.
You've attended his training?
I attended one class from the Force Science Institute, which Bill Lewinsky is the owner of that and provides that training. I attended that in Los Angeles, California, I believe in 2013. It's a week-long, 40-hour class. That's the only affiliation I've had with Mr. Lewinsky.
Did you hear the term during that 40-hour class, inattentional blindness?
I have heard that term, yes.
Can you define that for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
Well, inattentional blindness, in simple terms, is when somebody is focused keenly on a situation and may not be aware, even though maybe they see something, they don't process that and they don't remember it because they're focused on a particular matter. For example, when I walked into the courtroom today, you may have seen me from head to toe, but if I were to ask you right now what color my shoes are, you probably wouldn't be able to tell me that because you weren't focused on that as I walked in.
So, and would you agree that that term encompasses people not being able to remember every specific detail of an event?
Yes.
And would you agree that on a rapidly evolving situation that it might even be less likely that people would remember or a person would remember every detail?
That is correct. When any of us as humans are involved in a chaotic situation, there is certainly the opportunity to not remember every fact that happened. That's correct.
And for example, someone thinks they're reaching through a steering wheel, but perhaps their hand is only pressed up against the steering wheel. That could be something that the difference could be due to unintentional blindness. Would you agree with that?
It could be, yes.
Thank you. Now, you indicated, I believe in your testimony, that you had no problem with Officer Tenzing initially stopping Sam DuBose, correct?
That's correct.
For the no front license plate and because he was armed with information that the registered owner of the vehicle was under suspension.
That's correct.
And You've agreed that he was authorized to be patrolling where he was patrolling.
That's correct.
He's authorized as a University of Cincinnati police officer, OPATA certified by the state of Ohio, to enforce the traffic laws in the state of Ohio, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
And I believe you indicated that you had reviewed various University of Cincinnati Police Department policies and procedures.
I was provided their use of force policy, yes.
Is that the only one?
I believe so, yes.
Did you see the policy that says that their officers shall enforce traffic laws, not may enforce them, or if you feel like it, but you shall enforce violations of traffic laws?
I don't remember seeing a policy that stated that.
Okay. Do you have such a policy at Post Falls?
No, we do not.
Now, I believe you indicated in your testimony that you felt that Officer Tenzing used reasonable tactics and methodology in initiating the traffic stop. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And he properly identified himself as he walked up to Mr. DeBose's car. He told him who he was and why he stopped him.
That's correct, yes.
No problem with that, correct?
Correct.
It was appropriate that he should ask Mr. DeBose for a driver's license.
That's correct, yes.
And were you aware, by the way, that Mr. DeBose had been slow to stop and that he took Officer Tenzing back into the area of Rice and Thill Street?
Yes, I did hear that on the video and in Mr. Tenzing's statement that he was described him as slow to stop, yes.
As a police officer, what does slow to stop mean to you?
Typically, when an officer says that someone's slow to stop, when they turn their lights on, typically a motorist would immediately pull to the side of the road. When they don't do that and you have to follow them for a period of time, that would be slow to stop, is what that would mean.
And does that raise concern on your part as a police officer?
You would certainly take that into consideration. It can mean a wide variety of things that are happening. It could be that someone has criminal intent, or it could be just someone is not paying attention. And I've seen both of those as reasons for people being slow to stop.
And on the video, did you hear Officer Tenzing hit the yelper on his siren a couple times?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Now, up to the point that Officer Tenzing asked for a driver's license, you didn't find anything inappropriate or unreasonable about what he had done, correct?
That's correct.
And I believe that in your direct testimony, you indicated that Officer Tenzing asked Mr. DeBose to step out of his vehicle. You remember saying that?
I believe what my testimony was is that he asked him to remove his seatbelt as he reached to open the door. I don't know if the words, "will you get out of the vehicle," actually occurred, but
Well, and that's exactly right. You remember Officer Tenzing said, "Until I can figure out who you are, go ahead and take your seatbelt off for me." Do you remember that on that tape?
I believe that's correct, yes.
He never once asked him to get out of the vehicle. Would you agree with me on that?
I believe that's true, yes.
Okay, it was probably his intent to get DeBose out of the vehicle. Agree with that?
I would agree with that.
But he never got to that point.
Correct.
Now, you indicated at that point, and I believe if I'm correct here, Officer Tenzing reached with his left hand to open the door, right?
Correct.
Mr. DeBose, with his left hand, reached up and pulled that door shut.
Correct.
So we've now gone, and this is after he's been requested multiple times for a driver's license. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, yes.
And he's gotten multiple evasive type of answers or no response at all. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that.
And as a police officer, would you agree with me that if you were in that situation, you would be even more concerned beyond the slow to stop? You would be even more concerned about his non-compliance?
Yeah, I think that's certainly a sign for a police officer to consider that the person is not being cooperative. Yes, I would take that into consideration.
And then when Mr. DeBose reached up and pulled the door shut, all of a sudden it turns from kind of passive non-compliance to a little active resistance. Would you agree with that terminology?
I don't know that I would agree with that. terminology. I think the way Officer Tenzing described it is he felt that he was being, I think the term he used was a little aggressive during his follow-up interview on July 21st.
Well, how about when the door is pulled shut with the left hand and the right hand of Mr. DeBose is starting the car and dropping down and putting it into gear? Would you consider that a little active resistance?
Yes, I would consider that, yes.
And how about when you add the factor to that he steps on the gas? Would you consider that active resistance?
Well, I would consider if it was an intentional activation of the accelerator, yes, would consider that to be resistance.
Okay, and you indicated in response to Mr. Gibson's questions that Samuel DeBose was not armed on July 19, 2015, correct?
That's correct.
You weren't aware of any evidence that he was armed?
I'm not aware that he was, of any evidence that he was armed with a firearm or a knife, anything like that, yes.
Would you agree with me, or have you ever seen situations in your 30-year career where an automobile was converted from a simple machine to carry you from here to there to a deadly weapon?
Yes, there are occasions that I've seen in law enforcement where officers have been injured or killed by motor vehicles.
And would you agree to me that when Mr. DeBose started that car, stepped on the accelerator, turned to the left with Officer Tenzing's arm inside the car, he had changed from resisting to actively attempting to injure the officer?
In my review of the video, I didn't see all of those things occur, but I guess maybe you could clarify the question.
Yes. Would you like him to get up and come and watch it? Very good. That's fine. We know.
Chief, I understand that you don't claim to be a video expert, correct? But you did look at this video. Can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what you see occurring in that frame?
Judge, can I interrupt just so the record's clear, he's looking at State's Exhibit 20, is that correct?
I assume that's the
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay. State's Exhibit 20, Grant Fredericks, and slide 145.
If I put that right in the back, sort of a reference.
Absolutely. Take your time.
Okay, so here we see Tenzing's left hand in front of the steering wheel, he's reaching in. Mr. DeVos is reaching with his left hand. Or actually, his left hand is leading the door.
Would you agree with me that his left hand appears to be moving toward Officer Tenzing's left arm?
Well, in my opinion, in reviewing this, what I believe is happening is as the officer is lunging in, this is my opinion, that it's a sort of a shock reaction of sort of going into a, someone lunges into the car, everything's happening quickly, the reaction would be to sort of protect yourself.
And again, that is your opinion.
That's my opinion.
Okay.
So I believe what this slide is depicting is Officer Tenzing's left hand in the vehicle and Mr. DeVos moving his vehicle from the door to his right.
And do you see his hand in contact with Officer Tenzing's arm there?
I cannot tell from this picture whether it's in contact or not.
Let's-
They're in the same proximity.
Go to the next one. Does that tell you anything more?
Again, it appears that the hands are his hand is in the same proximity as Officer Tenzing's arm, but I cannot tell if they're actually touching or not. And the thing you have to consider about this.
Let me ask you the question.
Can you finish his answer, please?
Go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we're looking at milliseconds here, frame by frame, so it can be difficult sometimes to determine exactly.
Can be very difficult, correct? Would you agree with me that both Officer Tenzing's left arm, left hand, and Samuel DeBose's left hand are both in very close proximity to the steering wheel?
I would agree with that.
And you can't tell from that particular screenshot whether they're actually in contact with the steering wheel?
No.
Okay, while you're up there, can you go back to slide number 2, please? Okay, again, I agree that, or I recognize that you don't claim to be a video expert. Can you look at slide number 2 and look at the front wheel of Mr. DeBose's Honda? And can you determine from that what direction it's pointed in? In other words, what I'm asking, is it going straight or is it turn to the left, turn to the right? Can you tell? Okay. Does it appear to be more straightforward than turned in any direction?
The vehicle actually looks to me to be a little bit canted to the left, just in the position that it's in, with the vehicle pointing forward, but it's very difficult to tell.
Can you look at that photograph and look at the roadway and tell whether that's level, uphill, or downhill?
It's difficult to tell from this photo, but I have been out to see to know that this is uphill from where this vehicle is parked at. It can be difficult in the picture.
Would you agree with me that for a stationary object to move uphill, for a stationary automobile, there has to be some force applied to get it to start uphill? Such as stepping on the gas? Such as stepping on the gas?
Either intentional or unintentional, there has to be some kind of application.
Okay, you can take your seat again. I believe that you testified that your opinion is that Officer Tenzing lunging into the vehicle was a tactical error that compromised his safety, correct?
That's correct.
And his likelihood of success was minimal at best, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Would you agree with me, and I think you indicated that this happens across the country all the time, where officers do that very same thing?
I don't know that to be the case. I would be speculating. I don't know.
Well, I think if I heard your testimony correct, that officers have done that before around the country and been seriously injured or killed.
That's correct. That was my testimony.
And would you agree that officers oftentimes just react instinctively to things?
That is correct. If proper planning does not occur, officers can react instinctively and use improper techniques.
Would you agree that in split seconds, milliseconds, as we've just talked about here, that officers don't have time to think or plan their course of action?
Well, what we encourage officers to do is to think about what's happening in that situation, to think about what's important right now, and to plan accordingly so that they don't have to make those split-second decisions. What happens is when an officer does not plan for something like this, you can have happen what I call the sort of the jack-in-the-box theory, where an officer is surprised and all of a sudden they make decisions that can be tactically unsound and set off a series of events that end in tragedy.
Okay, well, Chief, you indicated that Officer Tenzing was correct in attempting to obtain identification from Mr. DeBose, correct?
That's correct.
And would it be safe on my part to assume that before an officer does anything, he would like to know who he's dealing with?
That's correct.
And would it be safe on my part to assume that if he's not getting a response to that, that he ought to attempt to control the individual before he does anything else?
Yes, I would agree with that.
And would it be safe for me to assume that an officer, in order to control an individual, might want to get him out of the car and place him in handcuffs?
Yeah, that's certainly an option. Some officers like to leave a driver inside of the vehicle to contain the situation. Other officers like to get them out of the vehicle, and it's certainly officer discretion on how they handle that situation.
And as we discussed previously, the more squirrely an individual is, for lack of a better term, the more you need to make sure that you have the person under control. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I think that would be fair, yes.
Okay. And would you agree with me that for Officer Tenzing, when he had seen all these indicators from Mr. DeBose, to simply accept Mr. DeBose's offer to run his name and to leave Mr. DeBose unattended while Officer Tenzing returned to his cruiser to run that information in the computer, may be a mistake on Officer Tenzing's part?
I apologize. Could you repeat that question again?
I don't know if I can repeat that.
I'm sorry.
Would you agree with me that, I'll put it a different way, if Tenzing would have accepted DeBose's offer of his information and just simply turned his back and walked away to run him in his in-car computer, DeBose could have simply driven away at that point?
That's correct. Yes, he could have.
And at that point, Officer Tenzing had not even determined who DeBose was.
That's correct. He had not asked him for identification.
In spite of, well, he did ask him for identification, right?
That's correct. He did ask him for identification. He did not ask him for his name and his date of birth. Yes.
Okay, so before Officer Tenzing can secure Mr. DeBose, we have the opening the door, the starting the car, the taking off, correct?
That's correct.
And your testimony is that Officer Tenzing should have simply backed away and let Mr. DeBose take off. Is that a fair statement on my part?
Well, no, it would not be.
Okay, what would be?
Well, I think Officer Tenzing had several different options. He had, and I would be glad to go through those. One of the options would have been, considering the circumstances, would be to step back and ask his partner officers that had just shown up, it was a two-man patrol unit, to pursue Mr. Tenzing. That would have been one option. I think he had others.
You indicated, you don't dispute that video shows Officer Tenzing ending up laying on the middle of Ray Street, do you?
I do not dispute that.
Do you know how that occurred?
How he ended up on the street?
Yes.
I think he fell backwards and ended up onto the street as a result of this incident that happened.
And would you agree with me that the automobile driven by Samuel DeBose turned left into him, causing him to fall?
I do not know that to be the case.
Okay. Well, is it your opinion that the shot was fired here before the car moved?
Well, in my review of the video and talking with the video expert, it's his opinion that the vehicle has moved a fraction, and it's difficult to know exactly how far, but probably a foot or two is what I believe has occurred based on my review of this.
That's what Grant Fredericks told you, correct?
That's correct.
Because I believe originally you concluded in your written report that the car hadn't moved. Is that a fair statement on my part?
That could be accurate, yes.
And I believe originally you indicated that you reviewed the Kroll report as part of your investigation here, correct?
I did review that, yes.
And I believe originally the Kroll report says the car didn't move before the shot was fired.
I don't remember if it says that or not.
You don't dispute Grant Frederick's testimony, I assume?
No, I do not.
Thank you. Would you agree with me that a police officer is trained not to draw his weapon until such time as he perceives a threat?
That's correct, yes.
Did you notice in the video here, Officer Tenzing yelled, "Stop, stop," 2 times?
I did hear that, yes.
And would you agree with me that people generally don't yell "stop, stop" at a vehicle that's already stopped? Or at anything that's already stopped?
Well, I think it's difficult to know. I think only Officer Tenzing knows why he yelled stop. I mean, there's different reasons that an officer could yell at. It could be stop trying to start the car. It could be, I don't know why he yelled stop, stop.
And I think you would agree with me that, number one, you weren't there on July 19th, 2015 to appreciate what Officer Tenzing was perceiving or experiencing, correct?
That's correct.
And you would agree with me that this entire situation happened in less than 3 seconds, correct?
That's correct.
Would you agree with me that a reasonable definition of a tense, uncertain, rapidly evolving circumstance is exactly what was depicted in that video?
Well, it's my opinion that the situation was tense and uncertain, but I think that was created by the officer in this situation.
Sam DuBose had no role in creating the situation. Is that your testimony to this jury?
No, I believe that Mr. DuBose did play a part in that, but I think that the officer, based on his decisions at the time, escalated the situation and then reacted to that escalation.
And is it your opinion that an officer, if he makes a tactical error, forfeits his right to live or be free from serious bodily harm?
No, I don't believe that.
Thank you. You indicated that you reviewed this video. First you said several times in your direct testimony, and then you said dozens and dozens of times, correct?
Correct.
Would you agree with me that that kind of is the definition of looking at something with 20/20 hindsight?
That is correct, yes.
You were up there on Rice Street last December, correct?
Yes, I was.
Did you observe I guess for lack of a better term, guardrail or the steel post in the ground holding the hillside up on the east side of the street?
I did, yes.
And would that cause you concern as an officer if you had pulled a car over on that street?
I don't believe it would cause me any concern, no.
Would it cause you concern if a car started and began to move with you attached to it?
If I was actually attached to the vehicle and it was moving,
Yes, sir.
then yes, it probably would.
Sir, when you, I think, you said you reviewed the OPATA training manuals here for the state of Ohio?
I did review some of them, yes.
And can you cite me any place in that manual that says that a police officer should never reach into a car?
In the OPATA stops and approaches training material on 3 separate occasions, it states that an officer should not reach into a vehicle. And I have a copy of that here if you'd like to see it.
Well, how about the part where it says an officer should never reach into a vehicle with his dominant hand? Do you remember seeing that in there?
That is in there, yes.
Okay, and so what does that mean exactly?
That an officer shouldn't reach into a vehicle.
With their dominant hand?
In one time it does say, use the term dominant hand.
Well, to me, that would suggest that if you're going to reach into a car, you should do it with your non-dominant. I mean, is that a fair interpretation on my part?
That's not the way I read the material.
Well, then why would they put the part about reaching with the non-dominant hand?
I don't know.
Did you determine from your investigation or first of all, what is a dominant hand with reference to the Okata man?
Well, they don't have a term for dominant hand. I would assume it's depending on if you're right-handed or left-handed is what they're talking about.
And would you agree with me that they're talking about, with reference to the police officer, your shooting hand?
That could be, yes.
And did you determine what Officer Tenzing's shooting hand was in your investigation?
No, I did not.
Well, you watched the video, right? And you saw him shoot Sam DeBose in the head,
Yes,
and he had his gun in his right hand.
that's correct, yes.
Would it be fair to assume that his right hand was a shooting hand?
That's correct.
Thank you. As part of your investigation, you indicated that you reviewed the statements of Officers Kidd and Lindenschmidt, correct?
Yes, I did.
And Officers Kidd and Lindenschmidt both indicated in their statements that the vehicle was in motion before the shot was fired.
I believe that's to be the case, yes.
And your friend, partner, Grant Fredericks also reached that conclusion, correct?
Reached what conclusion?
That the automobile had moved and was in motion before the shot was fired.
That's correct.
You saw the video with the automobile parked in front of Mr. DeBose's car, correct?
Yes,
And would you agree that Mr. DeBose would have had to maneuver that vehicle to the left to avoid the parked car when he was driving away?
it's my opinion that Mr. Dubose was not in control of that vehicle when it left there.
So is it your opinion, if I understand you correctly, that by the time that car started moving, he had been already shot and was not in control of the car?
Within a few feet at most, he had been shot and that vehicle sped down the roadway. It's my opinion, based on reviewing the information, that more than likely he was killed immediately when he was shot.
You're not a coroner and you didn't review the autopsy report,
That's
right?
correct.
Okay. But it's your opinion that the car, if I understood what you just said, had moved after the shot was fired, or before the shot was fired?
That's my understanding, yes.
Sir, are you suggesting that Officer Tenzing did not have a fear of great bodily harm or death?
No, I'm not suggesting that.
Because you don't know what Officer Tenzing was going through in those less than 3 seconds, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Did you review the photographs of Ray Tenzing taken after this incident?
Yes, I did.
Did you observe the injuries that he sustained as a result of this?
Yes, I did.
And I think we can both agree they were minor, correct?
That's correct, yes.
But there were injuries.
Yes,
Did you look at his uniform and his equipment?
I did, yes.
And did you observe damage to both of those?
There was damage that was pre-existing, and there was damage that he had stated that occurred as a result of this incident. Yes, I did see that.
And you don't have any reason to dispute what he said, do you?
No, I do not.
Would you agree with me, Chief, that the camera sees only what the camera sees and not what the officer sees or perceives?
That's correct. There is a difference.
And I believe you actually published an article in some magazine that said something to that effect, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And I think you would agree with me. I think you said in that article that just because the camera sees something, that doesn't mean the officer sees it.
That's correct.
Did you see the gin bottle that was in the video on top of the car?
Yes, I did.
And as a police officer, if you encountered a motorist who had a bottle of gin, or a bottle that said gin on it, and he handed it to you, would you inquire further about that?
Yeah, I would certainly ask questions about that.
And would you do that after you had ascertained who you were dealing with?
Yes, the first thing that I would want to do as a police officer is to identify who I'm dealing with.
Thank you. And then your investigation would go from there if it led to anything, correct?
That's correct.
Now, you talked about two Supreme Court cases, Graham versus Connor and Garner versus Tennessee, correct?
That's correct.
And would you agree that the Garner case has to do with a fleeing felon?
That's correct, yes.
And an officer basically is not permitted to shoot a fleeing felon in the back as he's fleeing unless he has some reasonable belief that the fleeing felon presents a danger either to himself or to others, correct?
Has to have probable cause, yes.
Okay. And you would agree with me that at this point, Ray Tenzing does not know that Sam DuBose may be a fleeing felon, correct?
At what point?
At the point that the shot was fired.
Well, I think as a police officer, Mr. Tenzing would know that the reason that he had the stop made was for no front license plate, which was a minor traffic misdemeanor.
Certainly not a felony, right?
No, that's correct.
And would you agree with me that this case has nothing to do with a fleeing felon?
Well, it's a subject that is fleeing.
Well, it's a subject that you're using the term he's fleeing. He was shot before he fled, correct? He was shot because Officer Tenzing indicated in his statement that he feared for his life or his safety, correct?
That is correct, that Officer Tenzing said that.
Okay, so let's talk about Graham versus Connor. That's the gold standard. That's what all these cases are decided upon. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, you quoted a little bit from Graham versus Connor, I think. Or you summarized Graham versus Connor. I would like to read you a quote, and you tell me if this is correct.
Okay.
The reasonableness of a particular use of force must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene rather than with the 20/20 vision of hindsight. The calculus of reasonableness must embody allowance for the fact that police officers are often forced to make split-second judgments in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving about the amount of force that is necessary in a particular situation. The test of reasonableness is not capable of precise definition or mechanical application. Would you agree with me that that's the law in the United States?
I would agree with that, yes.
And would you agree with me that there's absolutely no test that you can apply to every single situation?
And there's certainly not a bright line rule. Every situation is a little different. That's correct, yes.
May I have a moment, please, Your Honor?
Take time.
Nothing further.
Thank you. Redirect?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Very good. Let me step down. This is witness free to leave. Any objection?
No, objection.
Very good. You are released. You may leave the courthouse. Thank you so much for your time. Do you need a break to prepare for the next witness? Ready? Very good. Call your next witness.
Officer Pham?
Morning, officer. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Very good. Go ahead and have a seat.
Tell us your name, please. Jimmy Nia Duc Pham. Jimmy Jimmy, Nia Nhia, Duc Duc Pham Pham.
Are you employed?
Yes, I am.
How is that?
I'm a crime scene investigator for the city of Cincinnati.
How long have you been a Cincinnati police officer?
I've been a police officer for approximately 11 years.
How long have you been with the criminal investigation section of the department?
As of this January, will be 4 years, sir.
What are your specific duties as a criminalist or crime scene investigator for the Cincinnati Police Department?
My responsibilities are to document and photograph the crime scene, collection of evidence, processing of evidence, and various reconstructions of blood splatters, during reconstruction, identifying fingerprints.
How do you approach a crime scene? In this particular case, July 19th of 2015, you were one of the criminalists from the Cincinnati Police Department that handled that crime scene. Is that correct?
That is correct.
When you get, let's say you walk into this courtroom and there's a body line here, how do you determine what's relevant, what's not, what to collect, what not to collect?
When we first initially arrive at the crime scene, by then it's already been contained by the first responding officers and patrol officers. They'll set up a perimeter. Once we arrive, the first thing we do is we'll do a slow walkthrough of the scene to see what we're working with, what's possibly just laying out in the open. We don't disturb anything or go do any kind of movement of any property or objects on the scene. Once we do an initial assessment of the scene to see where everything is and to see if we need to expand or shrink the crime scene at that point, we begin with photography. We'll photo
What
document.
was the crime scene? What did you make a determination you needed to contain as a crime scene in this particular case?
We decided to start from where the initial truck stop started on Vine Street. So that was roped off, stop on Vine, and then you'll go, it'll be westbound on Till, all the way up to, Till Street.
And that would be a left turn off of Vine?
If you're heading southbound, yes.
Okay.
And then once on Till runs, when we went to Till, it veers off southbound again. It'll be, it becomes, at points, Rice Street, from Rice Street, all the way down to
Valencia?
Valencia, and we consider that to be the entire crime scene.
Did you actually try to collect any items on Vine Street or on Thill Street? Was that something that you were paying a lot of attention to?
Oh, we did an initial walkthrough to make sure there was nothing there of significance, and then before we start photography, then we never collect anything from there.
And then I think you made a determination, it was really pretty much from the corner of Thill and Rice up to Rice and Valencia that you were concerned with an actual crime scene.
That is correct.
If you have a case where you're not sure who committed the crime, does that alter the way you approach the crime scene as opposed to in a case like this where it really wasn't a matter of who did something, but what happened?
Yes.
How is that different?
If we go to a scene where we don't know what exactly happened or who was involved, when we do our initial walkthrough, we look for everything that could possibly relate to the crime, anything out of place, anything that might have been left behind by a perpetrator, witness, or suspect, or even the victim. If we approach a scene where we have a basic understanding of what happened, then we gear our investigation more towards what happened and how it happened.
And I know we talked earlier, we had a local case here a couple of years ago where the key factor in solving the case was somebody had spit some phlegm on the street. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And that was a whodunit, and the officer was able to say it looked fresh, and that's how the killer was identified.
That is correct.
We've had cigarette butts that have been collected and DNA found.
That is correct.
This was not such a case.
No.
When you respond to a scene, I think you said you rope it off, you take photographs, and you collect some items. Is that correct?
That is correct.
As part of this investigation, I believe you collected certain items that were outside of a vehicle and certain items that were inside the vehicle up at the corner of Rice and Valencia.
That is correct.
I can first of all show you what's the Department of Education State Specific ID. Can you identify that?
This was the gin bottle with, I believe it's identified as a kind of perfume substance inside, but that was located in the roadway.
And at the time you located it, it wasn't in the condition it was in now, is that correct?
Yes, the difference was this liquid in this bottle that I collected as a sample was actually filled the entire bottle.
And you do not, you collected it, you photographed it, you don't do the actual examination to determine what's inside the bottle, is that correct?
That is correct.
That's sent to the coroner's office and they do that.
That is correct.
And they made the difference in appearance that we have today for that item.
Yes, the clear tape is what they added to it. The rest of this and the lab sheet, the rest of this is actually how I packaged it up and sent it to the lab.
But it's really what's the mark 4B, identify this.
Yes, this is the streamlight flashlight that we found also in the roadway.
Flashlight,
Yes.
it's exhibit 6C, identify that. And I believe when you handle items that have flawed bodily fluids on them, you have to use gloves, is that correct?
That is correct. Generally, anything we handle at that time of the incident, we'll always handle with gloves. Okay. This is the red hat we found in the back seat of the Honda that was at the scene.
Were you able to make a determination of how many shots were fired in this case?
Yes,
How many?
one.
Do you know what type of weapon was used?
It was a semi-automatic pistol.
Sometimes you have revolvers and sometimes you have pistols, is that correct?
That is correct.
Does that alter what you're looking for at a crime scene? For instance, someone has been shot and you know it's been with a revolver, what are you looking for?
When a revolver is fired, when the trigger is pulled, the hammer goes back in the revolver, and once the trigger reaches back, the hammer goes forward. It strikes the primer in the round that's inside that cylinder chamber. The bullet is fired through the front, but the shell casing stays inside the cylinder, and it remains in the gun until it's unloaded. On a semi-automatic pistol, when the trigger is pulled, the firing pin hits the back of the primer, which causes the gunpowder in the shell casing to expand and propel the bullet out the front. At that point, using the pressure of that's built up to eject the bullet through the front of the gun, the pressure builds up and it pushes the slide back and automatically ejects the round out of ejects the spent shell casing out of the gun, and it usually just lands on the ground, and then it goes forward again and it chambers the next round.
So in this case, since a pistol, a semi-automatic pistol was being used, you knew to look when it's shot, the slide comes back and the actual shell casing is ejected out of that opening, is that correct?
Sure, it is unloaded. Yeah, on this type of firearm, when it's fired, once the bullet exits, the build-up pressure inside the chamber will push this slide backwards like this. It will lock back just for an instant. The shell casing will be expended outside of the pistol, and there's another round in the magazine. It will obviously be picked up in the chamber and reloaded for the next pull of the trigger.
So you knew this was the type of weapon that was being used, you knew to look for not only the bullet that came out of the front, but the shell casing that came out of the top of the weapon, is that correct?
That is correct.
Did you look for both of those items?
We did.
Did you know that sometimes a bullet is shot into someone and they stay in the body, sometimes they leave the body, is that correct?
That is correct.
In this case, I believe you knew from speaking to the coroner, it was a through and through shot. It went in the head and it went out the head.
That is correct.
So you're looking for that bullet and you're looking for the shell casing.
Yes,
Did you eventually find both of those?
we eventually did.
I can show you what's been marked 5D. Can you identify that? That's a lot of packaging.
This is a 40 caliber Hornady shell casing I recovered in the back floorboard of the Honda on scene.
And you have photos of all these areas you're talking about that will be shown in the jury in a few minutes, is that correct?
That is correct.
So this was in the back seat of the vehicle.
It was on the floorboard of the backseat vehicle where we recovered it.
Just wanted to see. The projectile, was that a little bit more difficult to find?
Yes, it was.
Describe how you went about looking for the projectile.
Once we finished processing the original scene on Valencia and Rice Street, we had the car towed to our secure garage. The next 2 days later, we went there to search the car. When we searched the car, we photographed it as is, where everything is. Once during for the search process, we pulled everything out of the car. We went through the car initially, documented everything that was in the car, photographed it. We did not find that round initially. On a secondary search, when we were sent back,
Before we go further, did you look outside the car then for that projectile?
we did.
How
But,
did you go about that?
we knew that when the round was fired, the rear window of the car was down. We found some defects in the support structure between the front and rear seat, and there was some deformation there. We knew that there was a high probability that the bullet struck there, but we didn't know if it ricocheted outside the vehicle or somewhere in the vehicle at the time. So we had to search the exterior or the scene initially for it also because we didn't know where it was.
You looking for metal detectors or how to do that?
Both metal detectors and just hand-eye search.
Weren't able to find it outside of the car.
We were not.
Later on, did something happen inside the car where you kind of thumb luck found the projectile?
Yes.
How was that?
We were asked by the coroner's office to go retrieve all bottles out of the vehicle, other things they wanted tested. When we searched the car, we put everything back, we separated the car into 4 quadrants: the front driver's seat, actually 3 quadrants: front driver's seat, first passenger seat, and the rear seat. And everything that we removed from the car, we put in bags and we placed in that location where we found it to keep it all together. So when the coroner requested the other bottles, we came up there, we dumped the trash bags out to retrieve those bottles. The stereo system for the car, it was not actually mounted inside the console of the car. It was on the front passenger side floorboard where it's been initially. When we dumped out, the radio hit the ground and it broke in half and the bullet came tumbling out of it.
We'll give you credit for finding the bullet, okay?
Okay.
If I can say what's been marked 5E, can you identify that?
This is the fire projectile that we recovered from inside the radio. And this is just swabs that the lab made. So.
The officers found all these items appear to be in the same basic condition as when you found them except for the chewing gum.
Yes.
You also found other items in the vehicle? And a lot of personal property and so forth?
Yes,
I believe there was also marijuana found in the vehicle, is that correct?
that is correct.
Where was that found?
There was a cell phone box found in the back seat of the car, behind the driver's seat. They had a jar full with marijuana in it,
A jar full?
or a jar with marijuana
A
in
jar,
it.
okay.
Okay. There was also a orange Nike bag that was tucked down below the front passenger side seat, and there was 2 separate bags of marijuana found in there. There was another bag that was hanging out of the center console where it'd be the armrest between the driver and driver's seat. There's marijuana there, and there was also a couple of bags in his pockets also that was taken by the coroner's office at the scene.
Did you also look in the vehicle? You indicated we found a shell casing and a bullet in the vehicle. Were there any other either live or spent ammunition, rounds or shell casings in the car?
There was not.
Was there any firearm in the car?
There was not.
Was there anything, any type of weapon in the car?
No.
You also indicated that all the stuff you've been referring to was also photographed, is that correct?
That is correct.
And you took some photographs, and I believe some other criminals took photographs of Officer Kenzie's uniform and gun belt and gun, and I believe a couple photos were also taken of Officer Kenzie at the hospital, is that correct?
That is correct.
Just, I believe Mr. Matthews has agreed that Officer Cunningham can, even though he did not personally take all these photographs, he can testify to all the photographs that the three different criminals took, is that correct?
Very good.
And also, can you approach the podium over here? And then before displaying these, and Mr. Matthews has seen these, I would ask you to admit in the evidence. Two A and 2G, the receipt photographs.
Did you say 2A through 2G?
Yes.
Okay.
There's also 2I through 2M. And other scene photographs taken later.
Judge, we have previously discussed our objections to 2A through N. This court has previously ruled and excluded 2E.
Okay.
And I do not, I actually have that set aside.
Great.
And we would review our objection to 2A through N exclusively. It's already been ruled on, and no objection here.
Very good. Photographs will be admitted and published over the defense objections to those few.
The door of the vehicle, I believe, at one point, officer was taken off of the car and taken to the coroner's office, is that correct? That is correct. If I can show you first of all 22A and B, can you identify those? Yes, that's the auto itself. And can you put them on the overhead? That would be 22A, you can actually see it right now. Can you just put this on? Will this show up on here or no? Okay. 22A is one of the photographs you took of the car, is that correct? That is correct. And the next one underneath? Just another view of that same door, is that correct? That is correct. Just these next couple photographs, just one-on-one, the family and others, we've limited them, but they do show those at the scene.
Ladies and gentlemen, you do have to look at all of the evidence, but you do need to prepare yourself for that.
If I can show you what's been marked identification is number 2A. Can you identify that? 2A would be the street run right here, Valencia, the street that runs back
be facing northbound. This is on the board. The person gets a wall right there in the final resting place when we arrive on scene. It's not about it.
And Mr. DeVos has been covered in a sheet, taken out of the vehicle and covered.
Yes.
2B,
2B would be, if you were staying on Rice Street, we should be facing eastbound, and you see the side of the car, and Mr. Bull is laying in the roadway.
2C,
2C would be a view of the car from the, if you're staying at the passenger side front door, looking into the vehicle, you know, one of the things you see, you look straight up at the ceiling of the,
is that here to you in Westbound?
that is
2D,
2B was taking southeast, well, he's staying outside the rear passenger side door, and I just took my camera, stuck it in, and took a picture forward, to catch the image of the front driver console.
you indicated there was a radio that you skillfully found the bullet in, is that correct?
Yes,
Where was that?
that would be the radio right here, then the front passenger side floorboard.
2H,
2H is standing at the rear passenger side car door, taking a picture straight in. This shows the back seat of the vehicle, and that would be the cell phone box with the drawing back block earlier.
and where was the shell casing found?
The shell casing is actually, you see where this red shirt laying on the ground is? It's actually right underneath it.
States Exhibit 2F, what does that show?
2F would be a scene standing down on the north side of Rice Street facing southbound,
Looking uphill?
looking uphill. Number 2 is the gym model. Number 3 is the flashlight. You see the front bumper of the vehicle here. The vehicle is actually slightly around the bend. You can't see this perspective.
What's the purpose of those placards with the numbers on them?
Here to establish evidence that would be like at the scene.
And I believe you have another criminal list that actually prepared a diagram that shows those where they are in the scene.
That's correct.
2G,
2G, it looks where the emergency society speedo is. The street down here is hill, and then heading this way, we head south up the hill. This would be a reverse perspective, where the first one that they saw the gin bottle and then the flashlight. This is just an operation where you see the flashlight first and then the gin bottle.
is Exhibit 2I,
2I is marked as part number 1. That is the UC police vehicle that was inside the crime.
2J,
2J is just how we marked the gin bottle that we found seen as bucket number 2.
that's how it looked at the time as opposed to what it looks like now.
Yeah.
States Exhibit 2K,
This would be bucket number 3 represents the plaque that we found.
2L,
2L is bucket number 4. That's where the vehicle struck the guardrail, and that's how we marked the impact to show the damage we did on site.
and following that up with 2M,
If you look at this picture right here, just continue up the road, if you stop at this orientation this way, just a little bit beyond that would be plaque number 5, which is the front bumper of the vehicle.
so the damage to the guardrail was just to the left in that photograph.
Yes, that's correct.
2N,
2N is plaque number 6, that's where the vehicle finally came to rest at Rice and Valencia.
and this is later on, you now put the placard on that. You all always take the photograph before and after you put the placard on, is that correct?
That is correct.
this is something else. You do not try to do a test fire or examination with the weapon. That's something you turn to the coroner's office.
That's correct.
State's Exhibit 5C.
5C is the discharge bullet that we eventually found that came out of the radio when I dropped it.
We don't need to keep going.
Okay.
6A.
6A is the red hat that we found in the backseat of the vehicle.
6B, is that another kilo?
6A is just half turn upside down on both you will get off.
The next few photographs, again, you did not take, another criminalist went to the hospital and took photographs of Mr. Tennessee, is it correct?
That would be correct.
You can just go through 7A through 7B.
I did not take these photos myself. These were taken by the officer Marty Vogel. This is picture of Officer Henry.
7A.
Yes. This is Mark 7B. This is marked as 7C. And this one is marked as 7B.
8A. And the fact that this photograph shows some magazines with the rounds taken out of them, it shows the firearm with the slide cocked back. When you take a photograph showing an actual live round, does that indicate there was a live round in the chamber? Is that the normal practice?
What I went through, that's how I set up, but I
And you didn't take these,
haven't set up, because that's generally how it's done.
and in this type of weapon, once it's fired and one bullet goes out the front, the shell casing kicks out the top, it automatically loads another round.
That's
Is
correct.
that correct? All you gotta do is squeeze the trigger again and the next round will come out.
Yes.
State's Exhibit 8B. That's the gun belt.
Yes.
8C. Handcuff pouch on the gun belt.
Would appear to be so.
State Exhibit 8D. Holster showing some damage to it.
Yes, that would be a pistol holster.
These would be some uniform photographs, 8E. That would be the front of the vest,
Yes.
back of the vest, 8F. Okay. Uniform shirt front, 8E. Undershirt was being worn at the time, 8H. Uniform pants, the front, 8I. Uniform pants, rear, 8J. And the, looking down on the front view of the boots, 8K. Rear view of the boots, 8L. Right side view of the boots, 8M. And the left side, 8N. Just a moment, Judge. I'll make sure they can say that. Also, if you could take your seat. We're doing
That's correct.
Do you have those with you?
Yes.
Okay, could you? I know the car was damaged at the time, so we're not sure what the measurements were prior to the damage being done, is that correct?
That would be correct.
You measured it as it was after this had happened?
Yes.
Was there a measurement of the opening and the driver's side window?
Yes.
What was that?
The horizontal measurement from the driver's side mirror to the end of the opening of the car door frame was approximately 32 inches.
32?
Yes.
Okay, and then it looked like the height varied from the, at the right, towards the rear, it was higher than towards the front, is that correct?
That is correct, because of the way a car door goes in the mirror, it starts up and then it proceeds back like that. So we took a measurement from the very back end, the largest part of the opening of the mirror would be 19 inches vertically, and then we took a measurement from right where the curve starts, the steepest angle, it'd be approximately 15 inches to the bottom of the window.
And we also asked to measure from the ground up to the bottom of the window. So if this is the ground and this is the opening to the window, how high is that off the ground? The bottom opening.
Okay. So this is the measurement that's in doubt because of the front tire is flat and the front suspension and the axle were broken on the vehicle. But the measurement of it as it is was a total of 34 inches from the ground going up to the very bottom of the window for that measurement.
And that was with a flat tire?
Yes.
So it would indicate it may have been a little bit higher than that.
Yes.
Did you also do a measurement inside of the car from the seat to the ground? And I think that also varied. The rear seat being a little bit lower than the front seat. The rear of the driver's seat, it sloped back. So the front of the driver's seat was a little bit higher than the back of the driver's seat.
Yes.
And you measure again from the ground level how it was off the ground.
Let's see here. From the rear of the seat where the bucket goes down into the ground, and this is with the flat tire and the broken axle, it measured approximately 16 inches.
And what about the front of the seat where Mr. DeBose was sitting? How high was that off the ground?
The very front of the seat would be approximately 19 inches.
And one other, or two other measurements I believe you did then from the seat to the ceiling, how much height was there or how different was it? If you're sitting in that front seat, how much room is there till you hit your head on the ceiling?
Okay. A measure from the very back of the seat, when you sit down where you back would touch it, straight from there to straight up to the sunroof is approximately 36 inches. And then because where the sunroof is, we took two measures. One was 36 to the sunroof, the other one was 29 inches where the visor comes straight down to the front of the seat. Yes.
No further questions of this one,
Officer Pham, you searched the DeBose vehicle twice, is that correct?
That is correct.
And you've indicated that you recovered, how many, several bags of marijuana?
Let's see here. Approximately a total of 4 bags and the 1 jar.
Okay. Did you ever weigh those?
Yes, I did.
Do you know how much that total weight was?
Yes. The total weight combined was 315.31 grams, or approximately 3/4 of a pound.
And there was additional marijuana recovered, to your knowledge, on Mr. DeBose's person, correct?
That is correct.
Now, I think also, I've seen records where you recovered 4 cell phones in the car, correct?
Yes.
And it looks like You indicated in your direct testimony you were asked to search the car again by the coroner and retrieve all bottles out of the car.
Yes.
What was that about? What kind of bottles?
There were various medications. There were bottles of, I think the correct term is called the herbal medications. There was definitely labeled as herbal medications, but they wanted everything that was unknown in the car, or even prescription pill bottles, anything there. They wanted to confirm what was in them.
Did you find prescription pill bottles?
We did.
Okay. And you indicated, I think, that you found a couple citations.
Yes.
What was that?
It was a parking ticket that was written to the vehicle.
And when you say citations, you're talking about tickets issued by,
The Cincinnati Police Department, yes.
in the measurements you took, did you ever take a measurement from the ground up to the highest point on the top of the roof?
We did not.
Do you have any idea how high that car is, how tall it is?
No, I don't.
Now, you photographed the flashlight that you later learned belonged to Officer Tenzin, correct, in the middle of Frey Street?
Yes, sir.
Did you learn as part of your investigation that flashlight had been picked up by another UC police officer at some point?
I did hear that at one point it was picked up by a UC officer, and then he put it back down, but I don't know if he put it back in the exact same location that he picked it up from.
It would be your belief that it was put back in approximately the same location, correct?
I actually can't really answer. I don't know.
How about the flashlight appear to have some damage on it?
It did.
And could you tell whether that was fresh damage or old damage?
I could not.
You indicated that in your search of the car you found a license plate, correct?
Yeah, there was a license plate found in the vehicle, yes.
Do you remember where?
I'll be honest with you, I don't remember. I just remember it was found in the vehicle.
Did it appear to be match the license plate that was on the rear of the vehicle? Do you remember that?
It did.
If I told you that it was in the glove box, would that refresh your recollection?
I would have to look at pictures, but that sounds...
We're happy to stipulate the whole judge.
Very good.
Officer Pham, do you have any idea why someone would carry a bottle labeled gin that was full of perfume?
I actually don't know why you would be carrying a bottle of gin with perfume in it, no.
You have a moment, Judge.
Take your time. Very good. Any redirects? Very good. Is this witness released?
Yes.
Any objection? Very good, Officer Pham. After you reorganize things, you are free to go.
Yes, ma'am.
Take your time. Feel free to leave the lawyers too. Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a recess. Remember, do not discuss this case among yourselves. Do not allow anyone to discuss it with you. Do not form or express an opinion on the case until it is finally submitted to you. All rise for the jury.